The funeral had been small. Nora Hale stood at the edge of the cemetery in a borrowed black dress, watching 6 men lower a pine box into cold earth. Her husband of 3 years, a man she'd known for barely 6 months before their wedding, was gone. Typhoid, the doctor said. Swift and merciless. She didn't cry. Not because she was heartless, but because grief required the luxury of time, and time was something she no longer had. Mrs. Hale. The voice belonged to Mr. Kavanaugh, her landlord, a portly man with thin lips and calculating eyes. He approached with his hat in his hands, the picture of false sympathy. Terrible tragedy, he said, though his tone suggested he was merely checking off a social obligation. Your husband was a good man. Nora nodded, knowing what came next. About the house, Kavanaugh continued, confirming her suspicions. I'm afraid with Mr. Hale gone, the rent situation becomes complicated. I have 2 weeks left on this month's payment, Nora said quietly. Yes, well, he shifted his weight. The thing is, Mrs. Hale, I've got a family interested in the property. They're prepared to pay 3 months in advance. You understand how business works. She understood perfectly. A widow with no income was bad business. How long do I have? End of the week would be ideal. 4 days. Nora looked past him to the handful of mourners dispersing across the cemetery. Neighbors who'd brought casseroles and condolences would not be bringing job offers or spare rooms. In a town like Granger's Bend, a woman alone was either someone's daughter, someone's wife, or someone's problem. She was rapidly becoming the latter. I'll be out by Friday, she said. Kavanaugh's relief was palpable. Very good. I am sorry for your loss, Mrs. Hale. The words were empty, but Nora accepted them with a thin smile. She'd learned early that some courtesies were performative, necessary theater in a world that punished women for acknowledging ugly truths out loud. By Wednesday, she'd sold everything that wasn't clothing or sentiment. The furniture brought less than she'd hoped. Her husband's tools, purchased on credit he'd never managed to repay, went to settle debts with men who looked through her rather than at her. By Thursday evening, she had $17, 1 trunk, and nowhere to go. She sat in the empty parlor as sunset bled through the windows, casting long shadows across bare floors. The house already felt like it belonged to someone else. In the silence, she inventoried her options with the methodical detachment of a woman who'd learned that panic was a luxury she couldn't afford. She could write to her sister in Missouri. Margaret had married a schoolteacher, had 3 children and a spare room that might accommodate temporary charity. The thought made Nora's stomach turn. She'd left home at 19 to avoid becoming a burden. Returning at 26, widowed and destitute, felt like proof of every dire prediction her father had made about her judgment. She could seek work. But doing what? Her needlework was competent, not exceptional. She could read and figure, cook and clean, skills every woman possessed and few could monetize. The boarding house had no openings. The general store employed the owner's daughters. The church had suggested, delicately, that charitable work might suit her circumstances, as if goodwill could pay rent. There was, of course, the option no one mentioned directly, but everyone understood. Mrs. Parsons' house on the edge of town, where women with limited choices made practical arrangements with men who didn't ask questions. Nora had no moral objection to women who chose that path, but she knew herself well enough to recognize she'd break before she bent that far. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. She wasn't expecting anyone. For a moment she considered not answering, but curiosity, and the faint hope that perhaps someone had come with unexpected opportunity drew her to her feet. The man on her porch was a stranger, tall, lean, probably in his 50s, with silver threading through dark hair and the weathered complexion of someone who spent more time outdoors than in. He held his hat respectfully and met her eyes with surprising directness. Mrs. Hale? Yes. My name is Thomas Winters. I apologize for calling unannounced, especially at such a difficult time. His formality felt oddly genuine, lacking the performative quality of most condolence calls. What can I do for you, Mr. Winters? Actually, I'm hoping to discuss what I might do for you. May I come in? Nora hesitated. Propriety dictated she shouldn't receive a strange man alone, but propriety was written by people who'd never had to weigh safety against survival. The house is bare, she said. I've sold the furniture. I don't require comfort, Mrs. Hale. Just a few minutes of your time. She stepped aside, letting him enter. He glanced around the empty room without comment, then turned to face her with the bearing of a man about to propose a business transaction. "I'll be direct," he said. "I represent someone who has need of a wife. The arrangement would be practical, not romantic. You would have a home, security, and independence within reason. In exchange, you would manage a household and provide companionship, though I use that term loosely." Nora stared at him. "You're proposing I marry someone I've never met." "I'm proposing you consider it." "On behalf of whom?" "Silas Roark." The name meant nothing to her, but Winters seemed to expect recognition. "I'm not familiar with—" "He owns the Roark Ranch, about 8 miles north of here. Cattle operation. Profitable, when properly managed." "Then why does a profitable rancher need a stranger for a wife?" Winters met her directness with his own. "Because he's crippled, Mrs. Hale. He was thrown from a horse 2 years ago. The injuries left him dependent on a cane, in chronic pain, and with a temperament that's driven off every housekeeper and ranch hand who valued their sanity over their wages." "And you think a wife would tolerate what employees won't?" "I think a wife would have reason to stay that goes beyond wages." "Such as?" "Survival. Same reason you're standing in an empty house 4 days before you're evicted." The bluntness should have offended her. Instead, it felt like the first honest conversation she'd had since her husband died. "Why me?" Nora asked. "Surely there are other women in difficult circumstances." "There are, but I've made inquiries about you, Mrs. Hale. People say you're sensible, that you don't complain, that you managed a difficult husband with grace." He paused. "Silas is a difficult man. He needs someone who won't crumble under pressure or run at the first harsh word." "Managed a difficult husband," Nora repeated softly. The phrase was diplomatic code. Her late husband had been a drinker, not violent, but volatile, swinging between grandiose plans and bitter self-pity. She'd learned to navigate his moods, to anticipate storms, to keep the household running despite his chaos. Apparently that education had marked her as suitable for another man's damage. What exactly would he expect from this arrangement? A clean house, decent meals, someone to manage household accounts and deal with tradespeople. He's not looking for affection, Mrs. Hale. He's looking for competence. And at night? Winters didn't flinch. "Separate rooms, he's made that clear. This is a practical arrangement, nothing more." "How romantic," Nora said dryly. "Romance is for people with options. You're a widow facing eviction. He's a crippled rancher who can't run his own household. This isn't about romance, it's about mutual necessity." The calculation was brutal but accurate. Nora appreciated that he wasn't dressing it up with false sentiment. "If I agreed, hypothetically, what would the terms be?" "You'd marry within the week, move to the ranch immediately. You'd have access to household funds for running expenses. Your room, board, and basic needs would be provided. In the event of his death, the house would be yours, plus a cash settlement sufficient to live independently. And if I want to leave?" "The marriage would be legal and binding, but Silas isn't interested in holding anyone prisoner. If you chose to go, you'd leave with whatever you brought, nothing more." "I have almost nothing." "Then you'd leave with almost nothing." Winters watched her carefully. "I won't pretend this is an ideal situation, Mrs. Hale. Silas is bitter, isolated, and not easy company. The ranch is remote. You'd be miles from town, from society, from anything resembling the life you've known. But you'd have security, a roof over your head, legal protection as a married woman." Nora walked to the window, looking out at the dusty street. A wagon rattled past. Somewhere, a dog barked. Ordinary sounds of a town that had already moved past her tragedy, a place where she'd become invisible the moment her husband died. "I'd like to meet him first," she said. "That can be arranged. Tomorrow?" "I'll collect you at 9. After Winters left, Nora sat on the floor of the empty parlor and allowed herself 5 minutes of something that felt like grief but was probably closer to rage. Then she stood, brushed off her skirt, and began to plan. She'd learned long ago that survival required clear eyes and steady hands. Sentiment was dangerous. Hope was a liability. The only reliable thing was her own capacity to endure. If she married this Silas Roark, it would be on terms she understood. A transaction. A shelter in exchange for service. She'd had worse arrangements. At least this time, she knew what she was walking into. The ride to the Roark Ranch took over an hour. Winters drove the wagon in comfortable silence, for which Nora was grateful. She'd slept poorly, running through scenarios, anticipating complications. By dawn, she'd packed her trunk and settled her mind. Whatever happened today, she'd face it clear-headed. The ranch appeared gradually. First fences in good repair, then pastures with cattle grazing under a pale morning sky. Finally, a house that surprised her with its size and solid construction. 2 stories, painted white, with a wide porch and shuttered windows. Not grand, but substantial, prosperous. He inherited it from his father, Winters explained as they approached. Built the operation up from almost nothing. Before the accident, he was one of the most capable ranchers in 3 counties. And now? Now he can barely walk across a room without pain. They stopped in front of the house. Winters helped her down, then led her up the porch steps. The door opened before they reached it. The man who stood in the doorway was younger than she'd expected. Mid-30s, perhaps. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair and a face that might have been handsome before pain and anger carved hard lines into it. He leaned heavily on a cane, his jaw tight with the effort of standing. "Silas," Winters said, "this is Mrs. Nora Hale." Silas Roark looked at her with eyes that were flat, assessing, and utterly without warmth. "You're younger than I expected." "You're ruder than I expected," Nora replied before she could stop herself. Winters coughed. Silas's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his gaze. Surprise, maybe, or reluctant amusement. "Come in," he said, turning away. The interior was clean but stark. Functional furniture, bare walls, the minimum required for living. A house, not a home. Silas lowered himself into a chair with visible effort, his face going white around the mouth. He didn't invite her to sit. "Winters explained the arrangement?" he asked. "He did. And you're here anyway." "I'm here to understand what I'd be agreeing to. It's simple. You'd keep this house running, cook, clean, manage supplies. I don't entertain, so you won't be expected to play hostess. I keep my own company. You'd keep yours. We'd share meals when convenient, otherwise stay out of each other's way." "That's a housekeeper, not a wife." "It's both. The marriage makes it legal, gives you protection. But I'm not interested in pretending this is something it isn't." His bluntness was almost refreshing. No false promises, no pretty lies. "Why marriage?" Nora asked. "Why not simply hire help?" "Because help leaves. Help gossips. Help needs managing." He shifted in his chair, pain crossing his face. "A wife has legal standing, shared interest in the property, reason to stay when things get difficult." "Things are already difficult. They'll get worse before they get better. If they get better at all." He met her eyes directly. "I'm not an easy man, Mrs. Hale. I'm in pain most of the time. It makes me sharp-tempered. I don't sleep well. I don't laugh. I don't make pleasant conversation. If you're looking for companionship or kindness, you won't find it here." "I'm looking for a roof over my head and enough to eat," Nora said. "I can tolerate sharp temper. I've had practice." "Your late husband? That's none of your concern." "Fair enough." Silas studied her for a long moment. "You understand this would be a business arrangement, nothing more." Mr. Winters made that clear. "And you're willing to accept those terms?" Nora thought about the empty house in town, the $17 in her pocket, the sister in Missouri who'd take her in with sighing martyrdom. She thought about Mrs. Parsons' house, and the boarding house that had no room, and the general store that didn't need her. "I have conditions," she said. Silas raised an eyebrow. "Do you?" "I want my own room with a lock on the inside. I want access to household funds without having to ask permission for every expenditure. And I want it understood that if this arrangement becomes intolerable, I can leave without being hunted down or harassed." "Agreed. Anything else?" "Respect. I'll keep your house and manage your affairs with competence. In exchange, you'll treat me with basic human decency. No shouting, no cruelty, no using your pain as an excuse to make my life miserable. I can't promise I won't be difficult." "I said no excuse, not no difficulty. There's a difference." Silas actually smiled. Brief, humorless, but genuine. "You might survive this after all." "I've survived worse." "Then we have an agreement." He stood with visible effort, extending his hand. "We can marry Saturday if that suits you." Nora took his hand. His grip was firm despite the pain he was clearly in. "Saturday is fine." Winters cleared his throat. "I'll make the arrangements. Judge Morrison can perform the ceremony. Keep it quiet, Silas said. No fuss. Understood. As Winters drove her back to town, Nora watched the landscape roll past and wondered what exactly she'd just agreed to. A loveless marriage to a bitter, crippled stranger. A life isolated on a ranch miles from anything familiar. An arrangement built on necessity rather than choice, but also safety, security, a place that was legally hers. No landlord to evict her, no charity to beg for, no sister's spare room to endure. She'd made her choice. Now she'd live with it. Saturday arrived cold and gray. Nora wore her best dress, dark blue, practical, already packed in her trunk. Judge Morrison performed the ceremony in his study with Winters and the judge's wife as witnesses. The whole affair took less than 15 minutes. You may kiss the bride, Morrison said with automatic courtesy. Silas looked at Nora. She looked back. Neither moved. Or not, Morrison said quickly. Well, congratulations. Winters drove them back to the ranch in silence. When they arrived, Silas disappeared into what Nora would learn was his study. Winters helped carry her trunk upstairs to a bedroom at the end of the hall, clean, spare, with a window overlooking the pastures and, yes, a lock on the inside of the door. Give him time, Winters said quietly. He's not as hard as he pretends. And if he is, then you're exactly the kind of stubborn that might survive him anyway. He tipped his hat. Good luck, Mrs. Roark. The name sounded strange. She'd been Mrs. Hale for 3 years, Miss Carson before that. Now she was Mrs. Roark, wife to a man she'd met once, in a house that felt more like a prison than a home. She unpacked her trunk methodically, hanging dresses in the wardrobe, placing her few personal items on the dresser. When everything was arranged, she went downstairs to explore her new domain. The kitchen was well equipped but showed signs of neglect, dust on the high shelves, supplies running low, a general air of things barely maintained. She found flour, beans, salt pork, enough to make a decent supper. She worked quietly, finding a rhythm in familiar tasks. By sunset, she had stew simmering and cornbread cooling. She set the table for 2, then went to find Silas. He was in his study, staring at papers he clearly wasn't reading. He looked up when she knocked. Supper's ready, she said. I'll eat later. I made enough for 2. It's hot now. I said I'll eat later. Nora felt her temper stir but kept her voice level. Fine. It'll be cold when you want it. She ate alone in the dining room, washing her dishes in silence. She left his portion covered on the stove, then went upstairs. Behind his study door, she heard nothing. This was her life now, this cold, silent house. This stranger who was legally her husband. This arrangement that felt less like marriage than mutual isolation. She locked her bedroom door, changed into her nightgown, and lay in the unfamiliar bed, staring at shadows on the ceiling. Tomorrow, she'd begin properly. She'd learn the house, the routines, the invisible rules that governed this place. She'd prove her competence, earn her keep, justify the shelter he'd given her. But tonight, in the darkness, she allowed herself one moment of doubt, one question she couldn't answer. What had she done? In the study below, Silas sat motionless, listening to the sounds of the house settling. Footsteps overhead, a door closing, the lock turning. He hadn't wanted this. Hadn't wanted the humiliation of needing help, of acknowledging his own limitations, of tying himself legally to a stranger out of sheer desperate necessity. But here they were, married, bound by law and circumstance. He looked down at his ruined leg, remembering the fall that had destroyed everything, the crack of bone, the searing pain, the endless months of agony and rage as he realized what he'd lost. Not just mobility, not just strength, control, independence, the ability to manage his own damn life. Now he had a wife, a woman he'd barely met, installed in his house, legally entitled to his name and his protection. The stew she'd made sat on the stove, still warm. Despite himself, he was hungry. He stood with effort, made his way to the kitchen, ate standing up because sitting down and getting back up again was too much trouble. The food was good. Simple, well-seasoned, exactly what he needed. He hated that it was good, hated that she'd done this competently, without complaint, exactly as advertised, hated that he needed her at all. He left the empty bowl in the sink and retreated to his study, where he could nurse his resentment in private. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. The first night of a marriage that was no marriage at all. Two strangers under one roof, bound by law and necessity, separated by pain and pride. Neither slept well. And in the morning, the real work would begin. The first week passed in careful avoidance. Nora learned the house room by room, opening cupboards and closets, discovering what had been neglected and what barely functioned. The parlor held furniture covered in dust sheets. The second bedroom upstairs was locked. She tried the handle once, found it stuck, and didn't ask. Some spaces, she understood, weren't meant for her. Silas kept to his patterns. He rose early, before dawn, and she'd hear the uneven rhythm of his footsteps on the stairs. By the time she came down, he'd already be gone, either shut in his study or limping out to the barn to bark instructions at the ranch hands. He took his coffee black and his meals in silence when he took them at all. Some days he simply didn't appear, and she'd leave covered plates outside his study door, finding them empty hours later. They spoke when necessary. Brief exchanges about supplies running low, about a loose shutter that needed fixing, about whether she'd met the ranch foreman yet. The answer to that last one was no. She'd seen men working the distant pastures, heard voices carrying across the yard, but no one had come to the house. No one had acknowledged her existence at all. On the 8th day, she found the ledgers. She'd been searching for writing paper in Silas's study. He'd gone out to inspect fencing, his absence announced by the slam of the front door and muttered curses about incompetent hired help. The desk drawer stuck, and when she finally worked it open, she found not paper, but a stack of account books, their leather covers worn and pages dog-eared. She shouldn't have looked. It wasn't her business. But survival had taught her that ignorance was dangerous, and understanding the shape of a situation was the difference between enduring and drowning. She lifted the top ledger, opened it to the most recent entries, and started reading. An hour later, she was still reading. The pages told a story of slow hemorrhaging, money going out faster than it came in, supplies purchased at prices that seemed inflated, payments to contractors whose work she hadn't seen evidence of anywhere on the property. Nothing dramatic, nothing obviously wrong, just a steady drain like a leak in a bucket that emptied itself drop by drop. She was so focused she didn't hear Silas return until his voice cut through the silence. "What the hell are you doing?" Nora's head snapped up. He stood in the doorway, leaning hard on his cane, his face dark with anger. "I was looking for paper," she said, setting the ledger down carefully. "The drawer stuck. I found these instead." "So you decided to read through my private records?" "I decided to understand the situation I've married into." "That's none of your concern. I'm your wife. Legally, it's exactly my concern." She kept her voice level despite the adrenaline coursing through her. "These numbers don't make sense, Silas. You're paying twice what you should for feed. Your equipment repairs are listed at prices that I don't recall asking for your opinion on how I run my ranch." "You didn't ask. I'm giving it anyway." She stood facing him directly. "Someone is taking advantage of you." His jaw tightened. "Get out." "Silas, I said get out." The crack in his voice, pain or rage or both, made her flinch. She walked past him, close enough to smell leather and sweat and the sharp medicinal scent of whatever he used to manage his constant pain. He didn't move, didn't look at her, just stood rigid, gripping his cane like it was the only thing holding him upright. She went to the kitchen and scrubbed already clean counters until her hands ached. Anger and frustration tangled in her chest. She'd overstepped. She knew that. But the numbers in those ledgers gnawed at her, patterns emerging that felt less like mismanagement and more like something deliberate. That night, Silas didn't come to dinner. She ate alone again, washed her dishes, left his portion covered. Upstairs, she locked her door and lay awake, listening to the house creak and settle. She'd made a mistake, but she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something wrong here, something beyond a crippled rancher's bitter isolation. The ledgers had shown her a shape she recognized from her first marriage. The slow vanishing of money, the explanations that didn't quite explain, the sense of control slipping away while everyone pretended not to notice. She'd been helpless then, watching her husband drink away their savings while she smiled and nodded and played the dutiful wife. She'd promised herself she'd never be that powerless again. But this wasn't her ranch. These weren't her accounts. And Silas had made it clear her opinion wasn't wanted. So she'd keep her mouth shut and do her job. Keep house, cook meals, stay out of his way. It was the smart thing to do. She just wasn't sure she could do it. By the end of the second week, a routine had established itself. Nora rose at dawn, made coffee, prepared breakfast. Silas appeared, or didn't. She cleaned, mended, inventoried supplies. The ranch hands remained invisible, though she saw them occasionally in the distance, shadows moving among the cattle, voices carrying on the wind. On Tuesday, she walked out to the barn, determined to at least meet the foreman. The structure was well maintained, horses in clean stalls, tack properly stored. She found a man in his 40s mucking out a stall, his movements efficient and practiced. "Excuse me," she said. "I'm looking for the foreman." The man looked up, surprise crossing his weathered face. "That'd be me, Ben Halloran." He set down his pitchfork, wiping his hands on his pants. "You must be Mrs. Roark." "I am. I wanted to introduce myself. I've been here 2 weeks and haven't met anyone who works the property." Ben's expression flickered with something that might have been sympathy. "Mr. Roark doesn't encourage socializing with the help, keeps things separate." "I'm not interested in socializing. I'm interested in understanding how this place operates." "With respect, ma'am, that's between you and Mr. Roark." "Mr. Roark doesn't talk to me unless absolutely necessary." Ben shifted uncomfortably. "Yes, ma'am. That's his way." She changed tactics. "The supplies that come in, feed, equipment, repairs, who handles the ordering?" "Mostly goes through Mr. Gideon Roark. He manages the business side of things, contracts and such. Has for about a year now, since Mr. Silas's accident made it hard for him to get around." "Gideon Roark," Nora repeated. "A relative? Cousin? Or maybe second cousin? The family tree gets complicated." Ben picked up his pitchfork again. A clear signal the conversation was ending. "He comes by every few weeks to check on things. Good man, very involved." There was something in the way he said it, "good man," that rang false, like words repeated because they were expected rather than believed. "When does he come next?" Nora asked. "Should be here Friday. Usually meets with Mr. Silas in the study, goes over accounts and upcoming needs." "I see. Thank you, Mr. Halloran." "Ben's fine, ma'am." She walked back to the house slowly, turning this new information over in her mind. A cousin who managed the business side, who ordered supplies and handled contracts, who'd stepped in after Silas's accident to keep things running, who had access to all those ledgers showing inflated prices and mysterious expenses. She had no proof of anything, just a feeling, a pattern, the kind of instinct that had kept her alive through 3 years of navigating her first husband's chaos. But feelings weren't facts, and she'd already overstepped once. Friday arrived with cold rain that turned the yard to mud. Nora spent the morning baking bread, a task that required enough attention to keep her thoughts from spinning in circles. She was pulling the loaves from the oven when she heard horses outside, 2 riders approaching through the rain. She watched from the kitchen window as Silas emerged from the barn, moving carefully over the slick ground. One rider dismounted, a tall man in an expensive coat, his bearing confident even in the downpour. He clasped Silas's shoulder in greeting, said something that made Silas nod, and together they headed for the house. Nora stepped back from the window, suddenly aware she was wearing a flour-dusted apron and her oldest dress. She had just enough time to untie the apron before the front door opened. "Told you the fence line was a priority," the visitor was saying. "We can't afford to lose cattle to broken wire." "I know that, Gideon." Silas's voice was tight with barely controlled irritation. "I've got Ben working on it." "Ben's one man. You need to hire more hands." "I need to afford more hands first." They entered the hallway, both pulling off wet coats. The visitor, Gideon, noticed Nora standing in the kitchen doorway. His expression shifted immediately, surprise giving way to something assessing and sharp. "Well," he said, "this must be the new Mrs. Roark." Silas turned, his face unreadable. "Nora, this is Gideon Roark, my cousin. He handles the business arrangements for the ranch." "How do you do?" Nora said, offering her hand. Gideon took it, his grip firm and his smile charming. "A pleasure. I had heard Silas had married, but I confess I'm surprised. My cousin isn't known for his social graces." "Neither am I," Nora said. "We suit each other that way." Gideon laughed, a warm, practiced sound. He was handsome in a polished way that contrasted sharply with Silas's rough edges. Mid-40s, maybe, with silver at his temples and clothes that spoke of money. The kind of man who knew his own worth and expected others to recognize it. "I hope you're settling in well," he said. This ranch can be isolated. Not everyone adapts to the quiet. I find it peaceful. Peaceful. He glanced at Silas. That's one word for it. Silas, we should go over those supply contracts. Unless, would you like your wife to join us, since it concerns the household? It was smoothly done. The offer that wasn't really an offer. A test, maybe, to see how Silas would respond. Nora has her own work, Silas said flatly. We'll be in the study. He limped past her without a second glance. Gideon followed, but not before giving Nora another assessing look, the kind that tried to take her measure in a single glance. The study door closed. Nora stood in the hallway, dismissed like a servant. She went back to the kitchen, finished cleaning up from the baking, and tried not to listen to the low murmur of voices behind the closed door. She failed. Even from the kitchen, she could hear the cadence of conversation, Gideon's smooth assurance, Silas's terse responses, the rustle of papers being reviewed. After an hour, she brought coffee on a tray, knocked once, and entered without waiting for permission. Both men looked up. Silas frowned. Gideon smiled. How thoughtful, Gideon said. Thank you, Mrs. Roark. She set the tray on the desk, noting the ledgers spread between them, the same ones she'd been reading the week before. One was open to a page of feed purchases, numbers she'd already memorized. Those grain prices seem high, she said, keeping her tone casual. I saw the same feed listed at nearly half that price in the general store last week. Silence dropped like a stone. Gideon's smile didn't waver, but something shifted in his eyes. Silas's jaw tightened. The general store doesn't deliver in bulk, Gideon said smoothly. The price reflects transportation and handling. Of course, Nora said. I just thought it was worth mentioning. Your concern is noted. Gideon's tone was pleasant, but there was steel underneath. Though these are matters that don't really concern the household. My mistake. She met his gaze directly, refusing to look away first. I'll leave you to it. She left the room feeling Gideon's eyes on her back. Behind the closed door, the conversation resumed, but quieter now, words she couldn't make out. She'd done it again. Spoken when she should have stayed silent. But something about Gideon's smooth charm and easy explanations set her teeth on edge. He was too polished, too quick with answers, too comfortable in his role as the competent cousin managing the poor crippled rancher's affairs. That evening, after Gideon had ridden off into the dusk, Silas found her in the kitchen preparing supper. Don't do that again, he said without preamble. Do what? Questioned Gideon in front of me. Make observations about things you don't understand. Nora set down her knife carefully. I understand numbers well enough to know when they don't add up. Gideon has been running the business side of this ranch since I couldn't anymore. He's kept this place from falling apart. Has he? Because the ledgers show you hemorrhaging money. That's the cost of keeping a ranch running when the owner can barely walk from the house to the barn. His voice was hard, but underneath it she heard something else. Pain, maybe shame. I'm not trying to undermine you, Nora said quietly. I'm trying to help. I don't need your help. I need you to keep house and stay out of matters that don't concern you. This ranch is my home now, too. That makes it my concern. You've been here 2 weeks. Don't pretend you understand how things work. I understand when someone is being taken advantage of. Silas's hand tightened on his cane. Careful, Nora. Or what? You'll send me away? We both know you need me here. She held his stare. I'm not trying to cause problems, but those numbers are wrong, and Gideon's explanations are too smooth. I've seen this before. Someone slowly draining resources while everyone's too polite or too proud to notice. Gideon is family. Family can steal just as easily as strangers, sometimes easier, because we trust them. For a moment, she thought he might actually listen. His expression flickered, doubt crossing his features. Then it hardened again, shutting down like a door slamming. Stay out of the business, he said. That's not a request. He left her standing in the kitchen, his uneven footsteps fading down the hall. Nora returned to preparing supper, her hands moving automatically, while her mind worked through what she'd learned. Gideon had control of the ranch's business affairs. He handled contracts, ordered supplies, managed accounts. And Silas, proud and stubborn and drowning in pain, trusted him because the alternative was admitting he couldn't manage alone. She had no proof, just instinct and numbers that didn't quite add up, and a cousin whose charm felt like a mask. But she'd learned to trust her instincts. They'd kept her alive this long. The question was what to do with them now. The following week brought cold that sank into the bones. Nora woke to frost on the windows and the sound of Silas moving through the house earlier than usual. She dressed quickly and went downstairs to find him in the kitchen, trying to manage the stove one-handed while leaning on his cane. "Let me," she said. "I can do it." "I know you can. Let me anyway." He stepped back, grudging, and she took over building the fire. They didn't speak as she worked, but the silence felt less hostile than it had before. Progress, maybe. Or just exhaustion on both their parts. She made coffee and cornmeal mush, setting his portion on the table. He sat heavily, pain etched in the lines around his mouth. "Bad night?" she asked. "They're all bad nights." She poured her own coffee, debating whether to push. "Have you seen a doctor recently?" "Doctors can't fix what's broken. They might be able to help manage the pain." "I manage fine." Which was obviously a lie, but she let it drop. Silas ate mechanically, staring at nothing. Watching him, Nora felt an unexpected stab of sympathy. He'd been young when the accident happened. What, 33, 34? Too young to have your life reduced to managing pain and watching everything you'd built slowly slip away. "Gideon's coming back next week," Silas said abruptly. "He's arranging a new contract for winter feed. I'll need you to make up the spare room." "He's staying here?" "Just overnight. The supplier he's meeting with is 2 hours north. Makes more sense than riding back and forth in one day." Nora nodded, keeping her expression neutral. "I'll prepare the room." After breakfast, she went upstairs to the locked bedroom she'd tried once before. This time, she found the key hanging on a hook in the hallway, half hidden behind a frame. The door opened with a protest of hinges, revealing a room that had been closed up for months, maybe years. Dust covered every surface. The bed was stripped, the wardrobe empty. A ghost of a room, preserved and abandoned. She spent the day cleaning it, beating dust from the mattress, washing windows, airing out linens that smelled of disuse. Physical work helped quiet her thoughts. By evening, the room was presentable, spare but clean, ready for a guest she didn't trust. That night at supper, Silas actually joined her at the table. They ate in their customary silence until he spoke. "The bread you made last week was good." It was possibly the first compliment he'd given her. Nora looked up, surprised. "Thank you. My mother used to make bread like that before she died." A confidence, small but offered freely. Nora handled it carefully. "How old were you?" 15. She got pneumonia, was gone in a week." He pushed food around his plate. "My father never recovered, worked himself into an early grave trying to prove he could manage alone." The parallel wasn't subtle. Nora wondered if he heard it himself. The echo of a man destroying himself rather than accept help. "I'm sorry," she said. "It was a long time ago." But grief didn't work on a timeline. She'd learned that with her own losses, her mother gone when she was 12, her father remarried to a woman who saw stepchildren as burdens to be endured. Time passed, but the hollow places remained. "The ranch was his dream," Silas continued, still not looking at her. "Started with 50 acres and built it up to over 1,000. He wanted to create something that would last, something that mattered." "It does matter." "It did. Before I broke myself and had to hand it over to Gideon to manage." There was the wound. Not just the physical injury, but the loss of control, the humiliation of needing help, the slow erosion of everything his father had built while he watched, helpless. "You haven't handed it over," Nora said carefully. "Gideon helps with the business side." "That's not the same as taking over." "Isn't it?" Silas finally looked at her, and his expression was raw. "I can barely make it to the barn anymore. I haven't been able to ride the property in 2 years. I sit in that study and sign papers I can barely read because my hands shake from pain, and I trust that Gideon is making the right decisions because I can't make them myself." "Then learn to trust someone who actually has your interests at heart." "Like who? You?" His laugh was bitter. "You've been here 3 weeks. You don't know this ranch, don't know the business, don't know anything except what you've read in ledgers you had no right to look at. I know when something's wrong. I know when numbers don't make sense. And I know that you're drowning and too proud to grab the rope." "What rope, you?" "If necessary." They stared at each other across the table, tension crackling between them. Then Silas pushed back his chair, standing with visible effort. "I'm tired," he said. Thanks for supper. He left her sitting alone with two half-empty plates and the bitter taste of a conversation that had gone exactly nowhere. But he talked to her, really talked, not just issued orders or grunted responses. It was something. Maybe not much, but something. Gideon arrived the following Tuesday with his usual charm and easy smile. Nora had prepared the spare room and made a beef roast for dinner, the kind of meal that demonstrated competence without seeming like she was trying too hard. Over dinner, Gideon dominated the conversation with stories about the various ranchers and businessmen he dealt with, painting a picture of himself as the indispensable middleman who kept everything running smoothly. Silas listened with his customary silence. Nora watched both of them, noting the dynamic. Gideon treated Silas with a particular kind of solicitude that managed to be both caring and condescending, asking after his health, expressing concern about whether he was pushing himself too hard, making gentle suggestions about limiting his activities, the kind of attention that looked like kindness but felt like control. "You've done well with this place, Nora," Gideon said, gesturing around the dining room. "Much better than the last housekeeper. She lasted, 2 months, Silas?" 6 weeks, Silas said. Couldn't handle the isolation, or the temperament. Gideon smiled at Nora. "But you seem made of sterner stuff." "I'm practical," Nora said. "This arrangement suits both of us." A marriage of convenience, how very modern. He sipped his wine, a bottle he'd brought himself, expensive and smooth. "Though I hope it's not entirely without affection. Even practical arrangements benefit from cordiality." "We're cordial enough," Silas said, his tone warning Gideon to drop it. Of course. Gideon changed subjects smoothly. "Silas, I've been thinking about the South Pasture. It's been underutilized for 2 years now. There's a cattle broker in Denver who's looking for grazing lease opportunities. Could bring in steady income without requiring additional labor." "Lease out our land?" Silas frowned. "My father would turn in his grave." "Your father didn't have your limitations, cousin. No offense meant, but we have to be realistic about what you can and cannot manage. Leasing out unused pasture makes good business sense." "I'll think about it." "Don't think too long. The broker's only in the area for another month." Nora cleared plates, listening to Gideon apply pressure with a velvet touch. Every suggestion framed as helpful. Every piece of advice delivered with concern for Silas's well-being. And underneath it all, the constant reminder of what Silas could no longer do, what he could no longer manage, how much he needed Gideon's help. It was masterful, really. Psychological manipulation dressed up as family loyalty. After dinner, the men retired to the study. Nora cleaned the kitchen, then took her mending to the parlor, close enough to the study to hear the murmur of voices, far enough to maintain plausible deniability if questioned. She caught fragments, contract terms, prices, the names of suppliers she didn't recognize. Gideon's voice, smooth and persuasive. Silas's, tired and increasingly acquiescent. She was threading a needle when Gideon emerged, catching her in the act of very obviously not eavesdropping. "Still up?" he said pleasantly. "You keep late hours, Mrs. Roark." "I find mending easier in the evening, better light from the lamps." "Of course." He crossed to the window, looking out at the dark yard. "You've made quite an impression on my cousin. He seems more settled than the last time I visited." "I keep the house running. That's what he needed." "Indeed. Though I wonder—" He turned to face her, his expression thoughtful. "What made you agree to such an arrangement? A young woman marrying a crippled stranger. It must have been quite desperate circumstances." The question was designed to put her in her place, remind her that she was here out of necessity, not choice, that she had no real power in this situation. "My circumstances were my own business," Nora said evenly. "As are my reasons." "Naturally, I meant no offense." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm simply protective of Silas. He's been through a great deal. The last thing he needs is complications. I'm his wife, not a complication." "Are you certain there's a difference?" He let that hang in the air for a moment. Silas is vulnerable right now. His pain, his limitations, they've affected his judgment. Someone could take advantage of that vulnerability quite easily. The accusation was clear, even if unstated. He was warning her off, establishing that he was watching, that any interference would be noticed. "I have no interest in taking advantage of anyone," Nora said, meeting his gaze directly. "I want this ranch to succeed. That benefits both of us." "Does it?" Or does it simply benefit you to maintain your comfortable position here? Gideon moved closer, his voice dropping to something almost intimate. I've seen women like you before, Mrs. Roark. Practical, ambitious, willing to marry for security. There's no shame in it. But don't pretend your interests and Silas's are aligned. You're here because you had nowhere else to go. Remember that. Heat rose in Nora's face, part anger, part fear at how accurately he'd assessed her situation. I think you should retire for the evening, Mr. Roark. It's been a long day. Of course. Forgive me for speaking plainly. I simply wanted us to understand each other. He inclined his head politely. Good night, Mrs. Roark. He climbed the stairs with the easy confidence of a man who'd made his point and knew it had landed. Nora sat frozen in her chair, needle forgotten in her hand. He'd done it so smoothly, questioned her motives, reminded her of her powerlessness, warned her against interfering, all while maintaining perfect courtesy. And he was right about one thing. She was here because she'd had no choice. That didn't mean she was trying to take advantage, but how could she prove that? How could she convince Silas she wasn't just another person trying to use him when that's exactly how the marriage had started? She heard Silas's uneven footsteps in the hallway. He appeared in the parlor doorway, leaning heavily on his cane. You should get some sleep, he said. Soon. She looked at him carefully, wondering if Gideon had said something to poison the well. Did you and Gideon finish your business? Most of it. He'll head out early tomorrow after we finalize the feed contract. Silas? She hesitated, knowing she was about to cross a line again. Be careful with those contracts. Make sure you read everything before you sign. His expression shuddered. I'm not an idiot, Nora. I didn't say you were. Gideon's been handling these arrangements for 2 years. He knows what he's doing. I'm sure he does. That's what worries me. Silas's jaw tightened. Has he said something to you? Because if he made you uncomfortable... No, nothing like that. She set aside her mending, choosing her words carefully. He just made it very clear that he's watching me, that he sees me as a potential threat to you. Are you? The question landed like a slap. Is that really what you think? I don't know what to think. You show up desperate, agree to marry a stranger, and within 3 weeks you're questioning my business arrangements and making accusations about my cousin. I'm not making accusations, I'm raising concerns. Based on what? Your vast experience running a cattle ranch? Based on numbers that don't make sense, and a man who benefits from keeping you dependent on him. Dependent? Silas's voice went cold. That's what you think I am? Dependent? That's not what I meant. Get out. Silas, I said get out. Go to bed, Nora. And tomorrow, when Gideon and I are finalizing contracts, stay in the kitchen where you belong. The words hit like a physical blow. Nora stood, gathering her mending with shaking hands. She wanted to argue, to make him understand, but his face was closed, his entire body rigid with anger and wounded pride. She went upstairs without another word, locked her bedroom door, and sat on the edge of her bed, staring at nothing. She'd pushed too hard, too fast. Questioned the one person Silas trusted when he'd made it clear he didn't fully trust her yet. Gideon had played it perfectly, positioned her as the threat, himself as the protector, and Silas had bought it completely. Outside her window, the night was dark and still. Somewhere in the house, Gideon slept peacefully, secure in his control. Below, Silas probably sat in his study, nursing his pain and his anger. And Nora sat alone, realizing she'd just made everything worse. But she couldn't unsee what she'd seen in those ledgers. Couldn't unknow what her instincts screamed at her. Gideon was stealing from Silas. Maybe not dramatically, not obviously, but steadily, systematically, counting on Silas's pride and pain to keep him from looking too closely. The question was whether she could prove it before Gideon made sure she was gone. Morning came with frost and silence. Nora woke to the sound of horses in the yard, Gideon leaving, his cheerful farewell to Silas carrying through the cold air. She stayed in her room until she heard the hoofbeats fade, then dressed and went downstairs. Silas sat at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee growing cold in front of him. He didn't look up when she entered. I'll make breakfast, Nora said quietly. Not hungry. She moved to the stove anyway, needing something to do with her hands. The silence stretched between them, heavy and uncomfortable. She cracked eggs into a pan, sliced bread, went through the motions while her mind worked through options she didn't have. I signed the feed contract, Silas said abruptly. Gideon negotiated a better rate than we had last year. Nora kept her back to him, focusing on the eggs. That's good. You don't sound convinced. You made it clear my opinion doesn't matter. I made it clear you should stay out of business you don't understand. She turned, spatula in hand, and I made it clear those numbers don't add up. We can keep having the same argument, or we can eat breakfast in peace. Your choice. His jaw worked, anger and something else, maybe exhaustion, crossing his face. You don't quit, do you? No, I don't. Even when it would be smarter to keep your mouth shut. Probably especially then. She plated the eggs, set his portion in front of him. Eat. You're not doing yourself any favors skipping meals. He picked up his fork, and for a moment she thought he might actually throw it. Instead, he ate, mechanical and joyless. She took her own plate to the opposite end of the table, maintaining distance. They finished in silence. When Silas stood to leave, he paused in the doorway. Gideon thinks you're trying to turn me against him. I know. He made that clear last night. Are you? Nora met his eyes directly. I'm trying to protect what's yours. If that means questioning your cousin, then yes. But I'm not doing it to cause problems. I'm doing it because someone needs to. I don't need protecting. Everyone needs protecting from something. You just don't want to admit what you need protection from. He left without responding, his footsteps heavy on the stairs. Nora cleared the dishes and tried not to feel the weight of her isolation. She was alone in this house with a man who didn't trust her, fighting a battle against someone who'd already won Silas's confidence. The smart thing would be to back down, do her job, stay quiet. But she'd tried quiet before. Tried keeping her head down and pretending not to notice when things went wrong. It hadn't saved her first marriage, hadn't stopped her husband from drinking them into poverty, hadn't prevented her from ending up desperate and alone. She wouldn't make that mistake again. Over the next week, Nora began her own quiet investigation. She couldn't access the ledgers. Silas kept his study locked now, when he wasn't in it, but she could observe. She made lists of supplies that arrived, noted quantities and conditions. She talked to Ben when she brought him coffee, asked casual questions about how things had changed since Silas's accident. Used to be Mr. Silas handled everything himself, Ben told her, warming his hands on the mug. Knew every head of cattle, every fence post that needed replacing. Now, he shrugged, Mr. Gideon does most of the ordering, can't fault the man for stepping up when family needs help. Does everything arrive as ordered? Ben gave her a sharp look. That's an odd question, ma'am. Just curious. I'm trying to learn how things work. Near as I can tell, yes, though I don't track every delivery. That's more Mr. Gideon's area, which meant no one was actually checking. Supplies arrived, bills were paid, and everyone assumed it matched because Gideon said it did. The perfect setup for skimming, not enough to be obvious, just enough to add up over time. That afternoon, Nora walked into town. The 3-mile trek took over an hour, her shoes not made for rough roads. But she needed information she couldn't get on the ranch. The general store was her first stop. Mr. Peterson, the owner, looked surprised to see her. Mrs. Roark, didn't expect you in today. Everything all right at the ranch? Fine, thank you. I'm just familiarizing myself with local suppliers. My husband mentioned you carry feed. Some. Not in the quantities a ranch needs, but we can order it in. What would you charge for, say, 100 pounds of mixed grain? Peterson named a figure. Nora kept her expression neutral, but her stomach dropped. It was almost exactly half what the ledgers showed Silas paying. And delivery? She asked. Extra, of course, maybe another $1 per 100 pounds if it's going out to your place. Still, nowhere near the prices in those ledgers. She thanked Peterson and left before he could ask questions she didn't want to answer. Her next stop was the land office, where property records were public. The clerk was a thin man who seemed annoyed by her presence until she explained she was researching her husband's holdings. Just want to understand what we own, she said, giving him her most helpless smile. I'm new to ranch life. He softened slightly and pulled out the relevant books. Nora scanned the property maps, noting boundaries and acreage. The south pasture Gideon wanted to lease out was clearly marked, over 200 acres of good grazing land. Has anyone filed lease agreements for this property recently? She asked. Not that I'm aware of. Would need the owner's signature for that. Of course. Thank you for your help. Thank it. She walked back to the ranch as the sun dropped toward the horizon, her mind churning. The feed prices were inflated by at least 50%, maybe more. No leases had been filed, which meant if Gideon convinced Silas to approve one, the paperwork might never materialize. Just another source of phantom income that went straight into Gideon's pocket. The pattern was clear now. Small thefts, nothing dramatic enough to trigger alarm, spread across enough categories that no single discrepancy stood out. Feed costs here, equipment repairs there, a lease payment that existed only on paper. Death by 1,000 cuts, and Silas too proud and too isolated to see it happening. She reached the ranch after dark, her feet aching and her mind made up. She had to tell Silas what she'd found. He might not listen, probably wouldn't, but she had to try. She found him in the parlor, staring into the fire. He looked up when she entered, his expression guarded. "You were gone a long time." "I walked into town. 3 miles each way in those shoes? You could have asked Ben to hitch the wagon." "I didn't want anyone knowing where I was going." That got his attention. "Why not?" Nora sat down across from him, choosing her words carefully. "I went to the general store, asked about feed prices." His expression closed off immediately. "Nora, just listen, please." She leaned forward. "Peterson quoted me half what your ledgers show you're paying. Even with delivery, the numbers don't match. Different suppliers charge different rates. Not this different, and I checked the land office. No leases have been filed for the South Pasture. So if you sign an agreement with Gideon's broker, where does that money actually go?" Silas's hand tightened on his cane. "You went through public records? Asked questions about my business around town?" "I was discreet." "You were investigating my cousin based on nothing but your suspicions. Based on evidence. Numbers that don't add up, prices that are inflated, deals that don't make sense. To you. They don't make sense to you because you don't understand this business. I understand theft when I see it." The word hung between them like a blade. Silas stood, his movements sharp despite the obvious pain. "You're accusing Gideon of stealing from me?" "Yes." "Based on what? Questions you asked a shopkeeper? Public records that don't prove anything?" "Based on a pattern. Based on numbers that any reasonable person would question." "And you just decided to handle this yourself? Without talking to me first?" "I tried talking to you. You shut me down every time." "Because you don't know what you're talking about." His voice rose, anger finally breaking through. "You've been here a month, 1 month, and you think you understand my business better than my own cousin? Better than me? I think you're in pain and isolated and desperate enough to trust someone who's taking advantage of that. Get out." "Silas, I said get out. Go to your room, Nora, and tomorrow you're going to stop this investigation or whatever you think you're doing. You're my wife in name only. You have no authority here, no right to question how I run this ranch." "I have every right. This is my home too. It's my ranch, my business, my family, and you're here on sufferance. Remember that." His face was pale, whether from pain or rage she couldn't tell. "One more word about Gideon, one more question around town, and this arrangement is over. Do you understand?" Nora stood slowly, her own anger rising to meet his. "Perfectly. You'd rather be robbed blind than admit you might need help from someone who actually cares what happens to you." "Cares? You're here because you had nowhere else to go. Don't pretend this is about caring." The words hit harder than she expected, because they were true, or had been true, and she couldn't quite articulate when that had shifted, when keeping this ranch safe had become about more than just preserving her own security. "You're right," she said quietly. "I came here desperate, but that doesn't mean I'm wrong about Gideon, and someday when you finally see it, I hope there's still something left to save." She left him standing in the parlor and climbed the stairs to her room. Behind her locked door, she sat on the bed and tried to figure out her next move. Silas had drawn the line. Stop investigating or leave. And she had nowhere to go, no money saved, no options beyond this ranch and this impossible man. The smart choice was obvious. Back down. Do her job. Keep quiet and safe and let Gideon continue bleeding the ranch dry, but watching someone destroy themselves through stubborn pride felt too much like her first marriage. Felt too much like standing by while everything fell apart, telling herself it wasn't her place to interfere. She'd sworn she wouldn't be that powerless again, even if it meant losing everything she had left. The next morning, Silas was gone before she woke. She found a note on the kitchen table in his rough handwriting. Gone to check the north fence line. Back tomorrow. Stay out of trouble. The last line might have been a joke in a different marriage. Here, it was a warning. Nora spent the morning cleaning with more force than necessary, scrubbing floors that were already clean, beating rugs until her arms ached. Physical work helped quiet her mind, gave her something to focus on besides the mess she'd made. Around midday, she heard a wagon in the yard. Through the window, she saw Ben helping unload supplies. Sacks of grain, coiled rope, tools still in their packaging. A delivery she hadn't ordered. She went out to meet them. "What's all this?" "Mr. Gideon sent it," Ben said, checking a list. "Said Mr. Silas approved the order last week." Nora counted the sacks of grain. 12, maybe 13. She thought about the feed prices Peterson had quoted, did the rough math in her head. This delivery probably cost 3 times what it should have. "Where does it all go?" she asked. "Barn storage, same as always." She watched them work, memorizing quantities. After they finished and the wagon pulled away, she walked to the barn. The storage room was organized but not inventoried. Sacks stacked against walls, tools hanging from pegs, everything accessible but nothing counted. She began counting. 1 sack, 2, 3, recording what was actually here versus what the delivery manifest claimed had arrived. The numbers didn't match. They were close, but not exact. A couple sacks short, a few tools missing from the packaging. Small discrepancies. Easy to miss if you weren't looking. Easy to steal if you were. She was making notes when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned to find Ben standing in the doorway, his expression uncertain. "Mrs. Roark, can I help you with something?" "Just inventorying supplies, making sure I know what we have." "That's usually Mr. Gideon's job." "I'm aware." She met his eyes. "Ben, how long have you worked here?" "Going on 8 years now." "And you've seen the ranch through good times and bad?" "Yes, ma'am." "Do you think it's doing well now? Financially, I mean." Ben shifted uncomfortably. "That's not really my place to say." "I'm not asking you to gossip. I'm asking your professional opinion. You know this ranch. You know what it needs, what it produces. Does it seem healthy to you?" He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful. "It seems like we're working harder and getting less. But Mr. Gideon says that's just the market. The cost of keeping things running with Mr. Silas unable to manage like he used to." "And you believe that?" "I don't know what to believe, ma'am. I just work here." But there was doubt in his voice. Not certainty, but the beginning of it. The awareness that something wasn't quite right, even if he couldn't name what. "If I asked you to keep a record," Nora said slowly, "of what actually arrives versus what the manifests say we received, could you do that quietly?" "Why would you want that?" "Because I think someone is stealing from this ranch, and I need proof before my husband will believe me." Ben's eyes widened. "You think Mr. Gideon?" "I think the numbers don't add up, and I think someone who's been working this ranch for 8 years might have noticed the same thing." He looked away, wrestling with something, loyalty maybe, or fear of getting involved in family business. When he looked back, his jaw was set. "I'll keep a record, quiet-like. But Mrs. Roark, if you're wrong about this, then I'm wrong and I'll apologize. But if I'm right and we do nothing, this ranch won't survive another 2 years. Mr. Silas won't thank you for it." "Probably not, but he'll still have a ranch." Ben nodded slowly. "I'll start with the next delivery, but I won't lie for you if asked directly. I wouldn't want you to. Just observe and record, that's all." After he left, Nora finished her count and returned to the house. She had an ally now, tentative and uncertain, but someone else who saw what she saw. It wasn't much, but it was something. That night she couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Silas out there alone, checking fence lines he could barely walk, proving to himself he could still manage when everyone could see he was drowning. Pride and pain locked in a cycle that would destroy him if something didn't break. She thought about Gideon's smooth charm, his careful manipulation, the way he positioned himself as indispensable while slowly stripping away everything Silas had left. It was brilliant in its cruelty. Help the man who can't help himself, all while bleeding him dry. Family loyalty as a weapon. And she thought about herself, a stranger who'd married into this mess out of desperation, now risking everything to fight a battle no one had asked her to fight. Maybe she was wrong. Maybe the numbers had explanations she didn't understand. Maybe Gideon was exactly what he appeared to be, a concerned cousin helping family. But she didn't think so. And doing nothing felt like dying slowly, watching the walls close in while pretending everything was fine. Silas returned the next evening, exhausted and limping worse than before. He brushed off her concern with a grunt and disappeared into his study. She left food outside his door, heard him moving around late into the night. The distance between them had become a chasm. They moved through the house like ghosts, occupying the same space without truly sharing it. Meals were silent when they happened at all. Conversations were limited to necessities. She'd become what he'd wanted at the start, a housekeeper who happened to share his name. It should have been easier this way, less complicated. But it wasn't, because somewhere in the past weeks, this had stopped being just about survival. The ranch had become something she cared about protecting. And Silas, difficult and proud and breaking under weight he wouldn't acknowledge, had become someone she couldn't just walk away from, even if he wanted her to. A week passed, then another. Supplies continued arriving. Ben kept his quiet records. Nora maintained the house and counted inventory and gathered evidence no one wanted to see. Then Gideon returned. He arrived on a Wednesday afternoon, riding in with that easy confidence, his smile bright and his manner warm. Silas greeted him with more warmth than he'd shown Nora in weeks. Watching them together, Silas actually laughing at something Gideon said, relaxing in a way he never did with her, felt like swallowing glass. Over dinner, Gideon dominated conversation as usual. He'd brought contracts for the South Pasture lease, he said. The broker was ready to sign, offering terms better than expected. $20 a month for grazing rights, Gideon announced, for 200 acres that you're not even using. That's, $240 a year in your pocket for doing absolutely nothing. Seems high, Silas said, but he sounded pleased. It's an excellent rate. The broker's desperate, has cattle coming in and nowhere to put them. Our timing is perfect. Nora kept her eyes on her plate, biting her tongue. $20 a month was a good rate, if it was real. If a broker actually existed. If the money would actually arrive instead of vanishing into Gideon's accounts. What's the term? Silas asked. 2 years. Renewable. Standard contract. I've already reviewed it with a lawyer in Denver. Everything's legitimate. Of course he'd say that. Nora set down her fork carefully. I'd like to see the contract before you sign, she said. Both men looked at her. Gideon's expression flickered with something that might have been annoyance. Silas's jaw tightened. That's not necessary, Silas said. It's 2 years of land rights. Seems like something both of us should review. Nora, I'm happy to explain any provisions, Gideon cut in smoothly. Though it's fairly standard, grazing rights, liability clauses, termination terms. Nothing unusual? Then you won't mind if I read it myself. Of course not, though I'm curious why you don't trust my assessment. The trap was perfectly laid. Either admit she didn't trust him or back down and look foolish. I trust that you believe it's a good contract, Nora said carefully. I'd just feel better understanding it myself. Since when do you understand legal contracts? Silas's voice was cold. Since I learned to read. And since this ranch is my home too. Your home on my sufferance, remember? The words landed like a slap. Gideon looked between them, his expression sympathetic. Perhaps, he said gently, this is a conversation better had privately. I didn't mean to cause tension between you. There's no tension, Silas said. My wife is overstepping, and I'm reminding her of the boundaries of her role here. Nora stood, her hand shaking with suppressed rage. My apologies. I'll leave you to your business. She made it to the kitchen before her composure cracked. She gripped the counter, breathing hard, fighting back tears born of frustration and humiliation. Behind her, she heard Gideon's voice, low and concerned. I'm sorry, Silas. I didn't realize things were so strained between you. They weren't until she started questioning everything, asking around town, investigating suppliers, accusing you of... He cut himself off. Accusing me of what? Silence. Then Silas, quieter. Nothing. It doesn't matter. It clearly does. What has she been saying? She thinks the numbers don't add up, that you're overcharging or pocketing money or, I don't know. She's convinced herself there's some conspiracy. Gideon's laugh was gentle, understanding. Ah, I see. And you've told her she's wrong? Of course I have, but she won't let it go. She's protecting you, in her own misguided way. A pause. Though I have to say, Silas, these accusations are concerning. Not because they're true, obviously they're not, but because they suggest your wife doesn't trust family, that she's trying to isolate you from the people who actually care about your well-being. She's not, isn't she? Think about it. She shows up desperate, marries you for security, then immediately starts questioning the one person who's kept this ranch running while you've been recovering. That's not concern, cousin. That's control. Nora closed her eyes, listening to Gideon systematically poison the well. Every word calculated to play on Silas's insecurities, his pride, his fear of being used. I should talk to her, Silas said, but he sounded uncertain. You should, but carefully. Women like that, practical, ambitious, they can be very convincing when their security is threatened. She knows if you trust me over her, she loses influence. So she'll try to drive a wedge between us. She's not that manipulative, isn't she? She walked to town asking questions about me. She's been inventorying supplies, tracking deliveries, building a case against me based on nothing but paranoid suspicion. That's not the behavior of someone who simply cares. That's someone who sees me as competition for your trust. Nora wanted to scream, wanted to burst back in there and tell Silas exactly what Gideon was doing. But she'd already overplayed her hand. Anything she said now would just confirm Gideon's narrative. The desperate wife trying to turn her husband against his family. She'd lost this round. Maybe the whole game. The question was whether she'd keep playing anyway. She didn't go back to the dining room. Instead, she climbed the stairs to her room and sat in the dark, thinking. Gideon had outmaneuvered her at every turn, anticipated her moves, countered her accusations, positioned himself as the victim of her paranoia. And Silas, wounded and proud and desperate to believe family wouldn't betray him, had chosen to trust the man bleeding him dry. The smart move was to stop. Pack her things, leave in the morning, find her way to Missouri, and her sister's reluctant charity. Cut her losses before this arrangement destroyed what little dignity she had left. But spite was a powerful motivator, and Nora had never been good at accepting defeat gracefully. If she couldn't convince Silas with words, she'd have to show him proof so obvious he couldn't ignore it. Numbers he could verify himself. Witnesses beyond just her suspicions. Evidence that didn't require him to trust her over Gideon. She waited until the house went quiet. Gideon retiring to the spare room, Silas's uneven footsteps finally stopping in his own bedroom. Then she slipped downstairs to the study. The door was locked, as expected, but the lock was old and simple. She'd watched her first husband pick similar locks when he'd locked himself out while drunk. It took 3 tries with a hairpin, her hands shaking with nerves, but finally the mechanism clicked. Inside, moonlight through the window gave her just enough light to navigate. She found the ledgers in their drawer, pulled the most recent one, and began copying entries by the faint glow. Every inflated price, every suspicious payment, every contractor's name. Her hand cramped within 20 minutes, but she kept writing, filling page after page of her small notebook. She was halfway through when she heard it, a floorboard creaking in the hallway. Nora froze, heart hammering. The footsteps were uneven, deliberate. Silas probably headed to the kitchen for water or whiskey or whatever helped him through the worst of the night pain. The footsteps stopped outside the study door. She had maybe 3 seconds before he noticed it was unlocked. She shoved the ledger back in the drawer, pocketed her notebook, and looked for an escape that didn't exist. The window was too high, too loud. The desk wouldn't hide her. There was nowhere to go. The door opened. Silas stood in the doorway, a lamp in one hand and his cane in the other. His eyes went from her face to the desk to the drawer she hadn't quite closed properly. "What are you doing?" Nora lifted her chin. "What you should have done weeks ago, finding out the truth." "By breaking into my study? Going through my private records? By getting evidence you're too stubborn to look at yourself." He set the lamp down with a sharp click. "Get out." "Not until you listen." "I said get out!" His voice cracked with rage and something deeper. "Do you understand what you've done? Breaking into locked rooms, stealing information, proving Gideon right about every damn thing he said about you? He's stealing from you, Silas. These ledgers prove it. These ledgers prove nothing except that you can't be trusted." He moved into the room, his limp pronounced from the late hour and pain. "You think I don't know what this is? You're desperate to be needed here, so you've invented a crisis only you can solve. Classic manipulation." The accusation stung worse because part of her wondered if he was right. If she'd seen patterns that weren't there because she needed to be useful, needed to prove her worth in a marriage that gave her no other way to matter. Look at the feed prices, she said quietly, pulling out her notebook. Compare them to what Peterson charges in town. Look at the delivery manifests versus what actually arrived. I've been counting, Silas. The numbers don't match. Peterson doesn't deliver in bulk. You're comparing different services. Not 50% different. Not with equipment repairs that never happened and contractors who don't exist and lease agreements that… Enough! He slammed his cane against the desk, the crack of wood on wood making her flinch. I'm done with this. Tomorrow you're leaving. The words hit like a physical blow. What? You heard me? This arrangement isn't working. You've overstepped in ways I can't ignore, and I won't have you in my house spreading poison about my family. I'm your wife. On paper. And that can be undone easily enough. I'll give you enough money to get to wherever you want to go, but I want you gone by tomorrow evening. Nora felt the ground shift beneath her. This was it. The end of her security, her home, the fragile stability she'd built. Back to nothing. Back to desperate. Back to the sister in Missouri who'd sigh and say she'd known this would happen. You'd really choose him over any possibility that I might be right? I'm choosing sanity over paranoia, trust over manipulation. His face was hard in the lamplight, but his eyes betrayed something else. Pain, maybe. Or doubt he refused to acknowledge. Pack your things tonight. I'll have Ben drive you to town in the morning. He turned to leave. Nora's hand moved before she thought about it, grabbing his arm. Wait. He shook her off. Don't. Just wait. Please. She took a breath, steadying herself. What if I can prove it? Not with ledgers you won't look at or numbers you won't believe. Real proof. Something you can verify yourself. There is no proof because there's nothing to prove. Then what do you lose by giving me 1 week? 7 days to either prove my case or admit I'm wrong. If I can't show you concrete evidence by then, I'll leave without argument. I'll even apologize to Gideon. Silas's jaw worked. Why would I agree to that? Because some part of you knows I'm right. You're not stupid, Silas. You've noticed things don't quite add up, but admitting that means admitting you've been played, and your pride won't let you go there. She met his eyes. Give me a week. If I'm wrong, you get to be righteously angry and send me away. If I'm right, you save your ranch. The silence stretched. She could see him calculating, weighing options, fighting against the part of him that wondered if maybe, possibly, she had a point. 1 week, he said finally, but you stay out of this study. No more breaking into locked rooms. No more asking questions around town. You bring me proof I can verify independently, or you're gone. Agreed. And Nora? His voice dropped. If you're doing this just to stay here, if this is some desperate ploy to make yourself indispensable, I will know. And I will not forgive it. I understand. He left without another word. Nora stood alone in the study, her heart racing and her hands shaking. 7 days. It wasn't much time, but it was something. She just had to figure out how to prove a crime when the criminal controlled all the evidence and the victim refused to believe he was being robbed. Morning came too soon. Nora woke gritty-eyed and anxious, her mind already running through strategies. She needed evidence that didn't rely on ledgers Silas wouldn't trust, witnesses beyond Ben who could lose his job, something concrete and undeniable. Silas was already gone when she came downstairs, avoiding her probably, or checking the property to prove to himself he could still manage. She made coffee and toast she didn't eat, staring at her notebook and trying to think. The sound of a wagon in the yard made her look up. Through the window, she saw a delivery. More supplies, another manifest to be signed and accepted without question. Ben was there, checking boxes off a list. And suddenly, Nora knew what to do. She grabbed her shawl and went out to meet them. Ben, hold on a minute. He looked up, surprised. Mrs. Roark, I need a favor. Actually, I need you to witness something. She turned to the delivery man. I'm sorry, could you wait just a moment before you unload? The man shrugged. Your time, lady. Nora went to the barn and came back with a ledger she'd borrowed. No, stolen, from the study the night before. She'd return it later, add it to her list of crimes Silas would probably never forgive. This manifest says we're receiving 20 bags of grain, she said, opening to the relevant page. The ledger says we ordered and paid for 25. I'd like to count what's actually in that wagon. Ben's eyes widened. Mrs. Roark, I don't think… Please, just count with me. If I'm wrong, I'll apologize and we'll never speak of it again. The delivery man looked between them. I got a manifest that says 20 bags. That's what I loaded. Then we'll count and confirm everyone's records match. It took 10 minutes. When they finished, there were 20 bags in the wagon. The manifest the driver carried said 20, but the ledger, the one Gideon had signed off on, showed payment for 25. 5 bags at the inflated prices Silas was paying meant about $15 vanishing into thin air. Where's the discrepancy? Nora asked the driver. Your manifest or our ledger? My manifest is what the supplier gave me. I don't know nothing about ledgers. She turned to Ben. You saw this? He nodded slowly, his face troubled. I saw it. And you'll testify to that if needed? Mrs. Roark, if this is about what I think it's about the truth, that's all. She turned back to the driver. Who ordered this delivery? Who placed the original order with the supplier? Mr. Gideon Roark, he handles all the orders for this ranch. There it was. The pattern made concrete. Gideon ordered 25 bags, paid for 25, but only 20 actually arrived. 5 bags worth of money going somewhere else, multiplied across dozens of deliveries over months, maybe years. Thank you, Nora said. Please unload as normal, and if you could, keep the manifest. I might need it later. After the wagon left, Ben stood in the yard looking sick. You think Mr. Gideon's been skimming? I think someone has. And I think it's been happening since Silas's accident made it hard for him to verify deliveries himself. That's a serious accusation? I know. That's why I need to be sure. She looked at him directly. I need more than one example. I need a pattern clear enough that even Silas can't deny it. He's going to hate this, hate you for showing it to him. Probably, but he'll still have a ranch when it's over. Ben shook his head slowly. You're either brave or crazy, Mrs. Roark. Can it be both? Over the next 3 days, Nora worked with quiet focus. She tracked every delivery, compared manifests to ledger entries, documented discrepancies. Ben helped when he could, his loyalty slowly shifting from protecting his employer's pride to protecting the ranch itself. Together they built a case that didn't rely on speculation or suspicion, just numbers that couldn't be explained away. Feed orders short by 5 to 10 bags each time. Equipment repairs billed but never performed. Contractor invoices for work no one on the ranch had actually seen done. Small amounts each time, nothing dramatic enough to trigger alarm, but adding up to hundreds of dollars over months. All of it ordered by Gideon, all of it approved by Silas, who couldn't verify the work himself. All of it bleeding the ranch dry while everyone pretended to be helping. On the 4th day, Nora made a decision that might destroy what little trust Silas still had in her. She needed to go back to town, to the suppliers themselves, to get documentation that couldn't be dismissed. She waited until Silas left for the day, then hitched the wagon herself, something she'd watched Ben do enough times to manage poorly but adequately. The 3-mile trip took twice as long as it should have, her inexperience obvious in every jolt and sway. At the feed supplier in town, she explained she was reconciling accounts for the ranch. The clerk, happy to help, pulled records showing exactly what had been ordered, what had been delivered, what had been paid for. The numbers didn't match the ledgers, not even close. Is there any chance Mr. Gideon Roark is receiving kickbacks from your company? She asked carefully. The clerk looked uncomfortable. I couldn't say, ma'am. That's between him and the owner. But it's possible. I just worked the counter. You'd have to ask Mr. Peterson about business arrangements. She found Peterson in the back office, going over inventory. He looked surprised to see her again. Mrs. Roark, more questions about feed? About business practices, actually. She sat down without being invited, channeling every bit of courage she had. I need to know if Gideon Roark has any kind of arrangement with you regarding the ranch's orders. Peterson's expression closed off. That's confidential business information. My husband is being robbed. If you're part of it, I need to know. Now wait just a minute. I'm not accusing you of anything illegal. I'm asking if Gideon negotiated any kind of commission or rebate arrangement that wouldn't appear on our invoices. Peterson was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful. Mr. Gideon arranged for the ranch to receive a discount on bulk orders. 10% off standard pricing. And where does that discount go? To offset his administrative fees for managing the account. That's what he told me. Did he tell my husband about these fees? I assume so. It's in the contract. What contract? Peterson pulled a file, showed her a document signed by Gideon Roark on behalf of the ranch. The arrangement was there in black and white, 10% discount from the supplier, retained by Gideon as a management fee. Does my husband's signature appear anywhere on this? No, but Mr. Gideon has power of attorney to handle business matters. Since when? Peterson checked the document. Since 2 years ago, right after Mr. Silas's accident, Nora felt cold wash through her. Power of attorney. Gideon could sign contracts, make arrangements, shift money around, all with legal authority Silas had apparently granted him when he was most vulnerable. May I have a copy of this? I don't know if I should. Mr. Peterson, my husband doesn't know about these arrangements. He's being systematically robbed by someone he trusts. I need this document to prove it. Peterson wavered, then sighed. If anyone asks, you got it from public records, not me. Understood. Thank you. She left with 3 copies of the contract, each one showing a different supplier, all with the same arrangement. 10% here, administrative fees there, costs padded, and money redirected. All legal, all documented, all hidden from Silas behind the shield of family trust and power of attorney. On the ride back, she rehearsed how she'd present this. The evidence was damning, but it required Silas to face ugly truths. That Gideon had been stealing from him, that he'd been too proud or too hurt to notice, that the woman he'd dismissed had been right all along. He wouldn't want to hear it, probably wouldn't forgive her for forcing him to see it, but at least the ranch might survive. She arrived home to find Gideon's horse tied outside. Her stomach dropped. He wasn't supposed to return for another week. Unless Silas had called him, warned him that Nora was getting too close. Inside, she heard voices in the study, Gideon's smooth tones, Silas's rough responses. She stood in the hallway, debating whether to interrupt or wait. The decision was made for her when the study door opened. Gideon emerged, saw her, and smiled. But there was nothing warm in it. Mrs. Roark, I hear you've been quite busy this week. Her blood went cold. Doing my job. Your job is keeping house, not interrogating suppliers about confidential business arrangements. He moved closer, his voice dropping. Did you really think I wouldn't find out? Peterson sent me a wire this afternoon. Apparently you've been asking very pointed questions. Questions that needed asking. Questions that reveal your true nature. You're not trying to help Silas. You're trying to undermine me so you can take control yourself. That's absurd. Is it? You show up desperate, marry a vulnerable man, then immediately start attacking the one person keeping his ranch afloat. Classic opportunist behavior. Silas appeared in the doorway behind Gideon. His face was unreadable. Nora, he said quietly. What did you find in town? The truth. She pulled the contracts from her bag. Gideon has power of attorney over your business affairs. He's been negotiating discount arrangements with suppliers and pocketing the difference as administrative fees. Fees you never agreed to and apparently don't know about. Gideon's expression didn't change. Those are standard management fees for handling complex business arrangements. Silas knows I've been managing the accounts. Does he know you've been taking 10% off every order? That you've been padding invoices and billing for services never rendered? I've been keeping this ranch running while he couldn't. Yes, I charge for that service. It's completely legal and documented. Legal doesn't mean ethical, and documented doesn't mean Silas actually agreed to it. She thrust the contracts toward Silas. Look at these. Read them. See what he's been doing with your authority. Silas took the papers, his hand shaking slightly. His eyes moved over the text, slowly processing what he was reading. The silence stretched, terrible, intense. These fees, he said finally, not looking up. I never authorized these. You gave me power of attorney, Gideon said smoothly. These are standard business practices. I've been transparent about my role here. Have you? Nora pressed. Because Silas didn't know about the discounts, didn't know about the administrative fees, didn't know you've been systematically taking money that should have been saving this ranch. I've been saving this ranch, me, while you've been here all of 2 months playing detective. Gideon's mask was cracking, anger seeping through. Everything I've done has been legal and necessary. Silas couldn't manage, so I stepped in. That's what family does. Family doesn't steal. I haven't stolen anything. I've earned every dollar for keeping this operation running when he couldn't. The confession hung in the air. Earned, not agreed to, not negotiated fairly, but earned in his own estimation. The entitlement of someone who believed his help deserved compensation whether or not it was offered. Silas looked up from the contracts, his face pale. Get out, Gideon. Silas, listen to me. I said get out. Take your horse and leave. We'll settle the legal issues later, but I want you off my property now. You're making a mistake. She's manipulating you, can't you see that? She's turned you against your own family. My family wouldn't have stolen from me, Silas's voice cracked. My family wouldn't have used my pain and my pride to rob me blind for 2 years. I kept this place running, while bleeding it dry. While taking money I didn't have, padding costs I couldn't verify, using the authority I gave you because I trusted you. Silas gripped his cane hard enough his knuckles went white. I trusted you, Gideon, and you betrayed that. For money. For keeping myself afloat while helping you. Do you know how much time I've spent managing this place? How many hours of my own work I've sacrificed? I deserved compensation. You deserved honesty. A fair negotiation. Not secret fees and padded invoices and lies. Silas pointed toward the door with his cane. Get out. Now. Before I have Ben throw you out. Gideon's face twisted with rage and something uglier. You'll regret this. You think you can run this place without me? You can barely walk from the house to the barn. You're broken, Silas, and she, he gestured at Nora, is just using you like everyone else. Maybe so, but at least she had the courage to tell me the truth. Gideon grabbed his coat and hat, his movements sharp with fury. At the door, he turned back. This isn't over. Those contracts are legal. I'll be taking this to a lawyer, and we'll see who comes out ahead. Do that, and I'll countersue for fraud and theft. Let's see whose lawyer's better. After Gideon left, his horse galloping away with the sound of hooves like thunder, the house fell silent. Nora stood frozen, waiting for Silas to turn his anger on her next. For him to blame her for forcing this confrontation, for destroying his relationship with family, for proving she'd been right when he'd wanted so badly for her to be wrong. But when he looked at her, his expression was just tired. You were right, he said quietly, about all of it. I'm sorry. Don't be. You saved this place. He lowered himself into a chair, pain and exhaustion written in every line of his body. I should have listened to you weeks ago. Instead, I let pride and stubbornness blind me to what was happening right in front of me. Nora moved closer, carefully. You trusted family. That's not a weakness. It is when it costs you everything. He looked down at the contract still in his hand. Power of attorney. I gave him that when I was at my lowest, when I couldn't manage anything myself. And he used it to steal from me. We can fix this. Get a lawyer, review everything he's touched, recover what we can. Can we? Or is it too late? How much has he taken, Nora? How close am I to losing everything my father built? She knelt beside his chair, looking up at him. I don't know, but we'll figure it out. Together. For the first time since she'd met him, Silas actually looked at her, really looked, without walls or suspicion or pride getting in the way. Why? He asked. Why did you risk everything to prove this? You could have kept quiet, stayed safe, kept your place here. Because watching someone destroy themselves through stubborn pride felt too much like my first marriage. Felt too much like standing by while everything fell apart. She paused. And because this ranch became mine too, and you became someone I couldn't just walk away from. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite trust, but the beginning of it. The possibility of it. I've been terrible to you, he said quietly. Yes. I accused you of manipulation when you were trying to help. Yes. I nearly threw you out for telling me the truth. Also, yes. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. You don't make it easy, do you? Neither do you. He reached out, his hand hovering near hers, then settling over it gently. The touch was tentative, uncertain, but real. Thank you, he said, for not giving up on this place. On me. Nora felt something tight in her chest loosen slightly. We're not done yet. Gideon will fight this, and even if we win, there's a lot of damage to repair. I know, but for the first time in 2 years, I don't feel like I'm drowning alone. They sat in silence as darkness fell outside. Two people who'd started as strangers, become adversaries, and were now, allies? Partners? Maybe something more, given time. But for now, alliance was enough. The first night after Gideon left, Nora barely slept. She kept expecting him to return with the sheriff, with lawyers, with some new manipulation that would turn everything around. But dawn came quiet, just the usual ranch sounds and Silas moving through the house earlier than normal. She found him in the kitchen, already dressed, staring at a cup of coffee he hadn't touched. "Couldn't sleep either," she asked. "Kept thinking about what comes next. The legal fight, how much he's actually taken, whether there's enough left to save." He looked up at her, and his eyes were raw. "I built my whole identity on being the man who could handle anything, and I let someone steal from me for 2 years because I was too proud to admit I needed help." Nora poured her own coffee and sat across from him. "Pride doesn't make you weak, it makes you human. Human and stupid. Sometimes those are the same thing." She wrapped her hands around the warm cup. "What's the plan?" "I need to see a lawyer, go through everything Gideon touched, figure out exactly how bad the damage is." He hesitated. "I'd like you to come with me. You've seen the numbers better than I have." It was the first time he'd asked her for help instead of resenting her for offering it. Something significant in that shift. "When?" she asked. "Today, if possible. The longer we wait, the more time Gideon has to cover his tracks or move assets around." They rode into town together in the wagon, Silas grimacing at every bump in the road but refusing to admit the pain. Nora had learned not to comment on it. His pride needed some space to exist even as he worked on setting it aside. The lawyer, a sharp-eyed man named Carlson, listened to their story with increasing concern. He reviewed the contracts Nora had obtained, asked pointed questions about the power of attorney, and made notes in neat handwriting. "This is actionable," he said finally. The power of attorney gave him authority to manage business affairs, but not to enrich himself secretly. "These administrative fees were never disclosed to you, Mr. Roark?" "Never," Silas said. "I knew he was handling orders and contracts. I didn't know he was taking a cut of everything." "And these padded invoices? You have documentation showing the discrepancy between what was ordered and what was delivered?" Nora produced Ben's carefully kept records, the delivery manifests, her own notes. Carlson studied them with the focus of a man who saw patterns in numbers the way Nora did. "This is systematic fraud," he said. "We can pursue both civil recovery and potentially criminal charges, depending on how much we can prove he took." "How long will it take?" Silas asked. "Months. Maybe longer if he fights it, which he will." Carlson set down his pen. "I'll be honest with you, Mr. Roark. Legal battles are expensive. Even if you win, the costs might eat up whatever you recover. You need to decide if pursuing this is worth the financial risk." Silas's jaw tightened. "He stole from my family's ranch, from everything my father built. I'm not letting that stand just because it's expensive to fight back." "Understood. I'll file the initial complaint this week, but I need you to prepare for a long fight. And Mr. Roark," Carlson's expression was serious, "you need to consider that Gideon will retaliate. He'll try to discredit you, claim you're mentally incompetent due to your injuries, paint your wife as manipulative. It's going to get ugly." "Let it get ugly," Silas said. "I'm done pretending everything's fine." On the ride home, Silas was quiet, processing. Nora let the silence sit, understanding he needed time to work through what came next. Halfway back to the ranch, he finally spoke. "I was thinking about my leg." Nora glanced at him, surprised by the change in subject. "The injury?" she asked carefully. "The accident that caused it. I told you I was thrown from a horse. That's what everyone believes. What I believed." He shifted on the wagon seat, his hand unconsciously moving to his damaged leg. But some things never quite made sense. The horse was well trained, not spooked easily. The day was calm. There was no reason for him to bolt like that. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying maybe it wasn't an accident." His voice was flat, controlled, but underneath she heard rage. "Gideon was there that day, offered to help me move cattle from the north pasture. Just the two of us, miles from the house. The horse reared up out of nowhere, threw me, and I hit a rock outcropping on the way down." Nora felt cold wash through her. "You think he caused it?" "I think it's convenient that the accident left me dependent on him. I think it's convenient that he was the one who found me, who got me help, who positioned himself as my savior." Silas's hands tightened on the reins. "And I think a man capable of stealing for 2 years is capable of worse." "Can you prove it?" "No. And even if I could, what would that change? My leg is still broken. The damage is still done. He looked at her. But if he did this deliberately, if he crippled me to take control of the ranch, I need to know. I need to understand what kind of man I trusted. We'll figure it out, Nora said. Add it to the list of things we're investigating. There's a woman, Sarah Mitchell. She was working at the ranch back then, helping with the household. She left a few weeks after my accident, sudden-like. I always thought it was because she couldn't handle the chaos, but maybe she saw something, knows something. Where is she now? Last I heard, she married a farmer about 15 miles east of here. I could write to her, ask if she'd be willing to talk. Do it, Nora said. Even if she doesn't know anything specific, another person's perspective might help us see the pattern. That evening, Silas wrote the letter while Nora prepared dinner. When he finished, he read it aloud to her, checking if the tone was right, not accusatory, but open to hearing whatever Sarah might share. It was a small intimacy, this asking for her opinion, but it felt significant. It's good, Nora said, respectful but clear about what you need to know. He sealed the letter and set it aside to mail in the morning. Over dinner, they talked strategy, what documents they needed to gather, what witnesses they should speak to, how to prepare for Gideon's inevitable counterattack. He'll come after you, Silas said. Try to prove you're just an opportunist who married me for security and turned me against my family. He's not wrong about the first part, Nora said. I did marry you for security. But you stayed for different reasons. She met his eyes. Did I? I think so. I hope so. He paused. What changed? Nora considered the question honestly. I stopped seeing this as just survival and started seeing it as something worth fighting for. The ranch, the work, you. She smiled slightly. Even when you were terrible to me, you were never cruel, just proud and hurt and struggling. I understood that, and I couldn't just stand by and watch it all fall apart. Because of your first husband. Because I learned what happens when you stay silent, when you let pride and fear keep you from facing ugly truths. She set down her fork. I was powerless then. I swore I'd never be powerless again. This ranch gave me a chance to keep that promise. Silas reached across the table, his hand covering hers. The touch was deliberate this time, not tentative. Thank you, he said quietly, for being stubborn enough to save me from myself. That night, for the first time since they'd married, Nora didn't lock her bedroom door. It was a small gesture, but Silas noticed. She saw his eyes go to the lock, then to her face, a question he didn't ask aloud. I trust you, she said simply. He nodded, something easing in his expression. Good night, Nora. Good night. Sarah Mitchell's response arrived 5 days later. She'd be willing to talk, she wrote, but preferred to do so in person rather than put anything in writing. Could they come to her? Silas and Nora made the trip on a Saturday, the journey taking most of the morning. Sarah's farm was modest but well kept, her husband polite but clearly curious about why the former employer wanted to speak with his wife. Sarah herself was in her 40s, practical and direct. She served them coffee in her kitchen and got straight to the point. You want to know about the day of your accident, she said to Silas. I want to know if it was an accident at all. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her words were measured. I didn't see what happened in the pasture, but I saw Mr. Gideon when he came back to the house to get help. And he wasn't panicked the way you'd expect. He was calm, too calm, like a man who'd been expecting trouble, not surprised by it. That doesn't prove anything, Silas said. No, but there's more. Sarah wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. After you were brought back, injured and unconscious, Mr. Gideon spent time in your study, said he was securing important documents, making sure everything was in order in case you didn't recover. I thought it was considerate at the time. What documents? Nora asked. I don't know specifically, but I do know he had papers with him when he left that night. And the next day he mentioned to me that you'd given him power of attorney to handle business matters. Said you'd signed it weeks before, as a precaution. Silas went very still. I never signed power of attorney before the accident. He brought those papers to me weeks later, when I was still recovering. Said it was temporary, just until I was back on my feet. Then he lied to me, Sarah said, or he had documents prepared in advance, waiting for an opportunity to use them. An opportunity he created, Nora said quietly. Sarah nodded. I started suspecting something wasn't right. The way he positioned himself, the control he took so quickly. It felt planned, not reactive. That's why I left. I didn't want to be part of whatever was happening, and I was afraid if I stayed and asked questions, something might happen to me too. The implications settled over them like cold water. Gideon hadn't just taken advantage of Silas's injury, he'd potentially caused it. Deliberately crippled his cousin to seize control of a profitable ranch. Would you testify to this? Silas asked. Tell a court what you just told us? Sarah hesitated. Mr. Gideon is a powerful man with powerful friends. If I testify against him, it could make trouble for me and my husband. I understand, and I won't pressure you. Silas's voice was steady, despite the emotion Nora could see underneath. But if you're willing, your testimony could help prove this wasn't just theft, it was assault, maybe attempted murder. Let me talk to my husband, Sarah said. If he agrees, I'll testify. But I need his support before I put us both at risk. They left with Sarah's promise to send word within the week. On the ride home, Silas was silent, his face like stone. You all right? Nora asked finally. He tried to kill me. The words were flat, emotionless. Or at least cripple me badly enough that I'd be dependent on him, and he succeeded. For 2 years, I've been exactly what he wanted, broken and isolated and grateful for his help. But you're not anymore. No, thanks to you. He looked at her. If you hadn't pushed, hadn't investigated, hadn't risked everything to prove I was being robbed, I'd still be drowning, still trusting him, still letting him destroy everything my father built. We don't know for certain he caused the accident, Nora said carefully. Sarah's testimony is suggestive, but not proof. It's enough for me. Enough to understand what kind of man he really is. Silas's jaw set. And enough to make sure he never gets near this ranch again. When they reached home, there was a horse tied outside. Not Gideon's, but someone official-looking. They found a man waiting on the porch, papers in hand. Silas Roark, he asked. That's me. You've been served. He handed over the papers. Gideon Roark is suing you for breach of contract and defamation. You're being called to appear in court next month. After the man left, Silas and Nora read through the lawsuit. It was exactly what Carlson had predicted. Gideon claiming the management fees were agreed upon, that Silas had been fully aware of all arrangements, that Nora had manipulated a mentally impaired man into turning against his family. Mentally impaired, Silas read aloud, his voice tight with anger. He's claiming my injuries affected my judgment, that I'm not competent to manage my own affairs. That's his play, Nora said. If he can prove you're not competent, the power of attorney stands and everything he did was legal. Then we prove I'm competent, and we prove he's a liar and a thief. They spent the next 3 weeks preparing. Carlson helped them build their case, gathering evidence, documenting discrepancies, preparing witnesses. Ben agreed to testify about the delivery shortfalls. The suppliers provided records showing the discount arrangements Gideon had negotiated. Sarah Mitchell, after discussing it with her husband, agreed to testify about Gideon's suspicious behavior after the accident. But building a case was only part of the battle. The other part was Silas himself, proving he was sound of mind, capable of managing his affairs, not the broken invalid Gideon would try to paint him as. You need to be able to demonstrate competence, Carlson told them during one of their meetings. Show the court you're physically limited but mentally sharp, that you understand the business, the numbers, the implications of what Gideon did. I can do that, Silas said. And you need to address the injury directly. Don't hide from it or minimize it. Acknowledge what you lost, but show what you've retained. That night, Nora found Silas on the back porch, staring out at the dark pastures. She sat beside him without speaking, waiting for him to share whatever was weighing on him. I've been thinking about my leg, he said finally, about what it's cost me beyond just the physical limitations. What has it cost you? My sense of self, my confidence, the belief that I could handle anything that came my way. He turned to look at her. I let this injury define me. Let it become an excuse for accepting help I should have questioned, for withdrawing from people who might have noticed what was happening, for pushing you away when you tried to help. You were in pain, still are. Pain doesn't excuse blindness or cowardice. He stood, testing his weight on his damaged leg. I've been so focused on what I can't do that I stopped paying attention to what I can do, and that's going to change. Over the next week, Nora watched Silas push himself in ways he hadn't since before the accident. He walked the property daily despite the pain, relearning the ranch he'd been avoiding. He reviewed every ledger, every contract, every business decision, reclaiming knowledge he'd let atrophy. And slowly, painfully, she watched him rebuild something that had been broken. Not his leg, but his sense of agency. One afternoon, she found him in the barn doing something she'd never seen before. He'd rigged up a series of exercises using fence rails and rope, working his injured leg through careful movements designed to strengthen what remained. "What are you doing?" she asked, trying something a doctor suggested 2 years ago. I ignored it then because I was too angry and too sure it wouldn't help. He grimaced through another movement. "Maybe it's too late. Maybe the damage is permanent, but I'm tired of not trying." "Does it hurt?" "Like hell. But sitting still and feeling sorry for myself hurts worse." She watched him work for a while, noticing the determination in every movement. This wasn't about healing completely. They both knew that wasn't possible. This was about refusing to accept helplessness, about taking back control in whatever ways he could. "I talked to Ben," Silas said, breathing hard. "Asked him to teach me how to ride again. Not like I used to, but adapted for what I can manage now." "That's ambitious." "Maybe, but I need to know I can still work this ranch, not just own it." He paused in his exercises. "If I can't ride, can't inspect the property myself, how can I claim to be competent to manage it?" "The court doesn't require you to be perfectly able-bodied." "No, but I require it of myself." The day of the court hearing arrived with unexpected warmth, winter finally releasing its grip. Nora dressed carefully in her best clothes, the dark blue dress she'd worn for their wedding, pressed and proper. Silas wore a suit that had been tailored before his accident and now hung slightly wrong on his changed frame, but he carried himself with determination. The courthouse was packed. Apparently, a dispute between the Roarks had drawn spectators, people eager to watch family drama play out in public. Gideon was already there with his own lawyer, looking confident and composed. The trial itself was technical and tedious. Carlson presented the evidence methodically: the contracts with hidden fees, the delivery discrepancies, the padded invoices. Gideon's lawyer countered that everything was documented and legal, that Silas had granted power of attorney and been aware of all arrangements. Then came the testimony. Ben described finding delivery shortfalls. The suppliers confirmed the discount arrangements they'd made with Gideon. Carlson walked through the numbers, showing how much had been siphoned away over 2 years. Gideon's lawyer attacked each witness, suggesting they were mistaken or biased or manipulated by Nora. And then he called Silas to the stand. "Mr. Roark," the lawyer began, his tone sympathetic, "you suffered a severe injury 2 years ago, correct?" "Yes." "An injury that left you unable to walk without assistance, unable to ride, unable to perform many of the physical tasks required to run a ranch?" "That's correct." "And you've been in chronic pain since then?" "Yes." "Pain that might affect your judgment, your ability to focus, your mental clarity?" Silas's jaw tightened. "My leg is damaged. My mind is fine." "Is it? Because by your own admission, you granted your cousin power of attorney to manage affairs you could no longer handle yourself. That suggests awareness of diminished capacity. It suggests I needed help with physical tasks, not that I couldn't think. Yet you didn't notice for 2 years that money was supposedly being stolen from you. Doesn't that suggest impaired judgment? It suggests misplaced trust, which is a failure of character, not cognition." The lawyer switched tactics. "Let's talk about your wife. You married her under what circumstances?" "She needed security. I needed household help. It was a practical arrangement." "An arrangement made while you were isolated and vulnerable. Is it possible she saw an opportunity to insinuate herself into your life and turn you against your family?" "No." "How can you be certain? She arrived desperate, married you within days, and within weeks was accusing your cousin of theft. That's a remarkable coincidence." Silas leaned forward slightly. "My wife saved this ranch. She noticed discrepancies I'd missed because I was too proud and too hurt to question family. She risked her own security to tell me truths I didn't want to hear. That's not manipulation. That's integrity. Or calculated self-interest. After all, if your cousin is discredited, she becomes your primary advisor. Quite a promotion for a woman who arrived with nothing." "Objection," Carlson said sharply. "Counsel is testifying rather than questioning." "Sustained," the judge said. "Move on, counselor." But the damage was done. The suggestion hung in the air that Nora was the real manipulator, that Silas was a damaged man being controlled by his opportunistic wife. Then Sarah Mitchell took the stand. She described the day of Silas's accident calmly and clearly. Gideon's unusual composure, the papers he'd taken from the study, his claim that power of attorney had been signed weeks before when Sarah knew it hadn't been. "How can you be certain about the timing?" Gideon's lawyer asked. "Because Mr. Silas had asked me to file his important papers the week before the accident. There was no power of attorney among them. I'm certain of that because I noted specifically what was there. The deed to the property, his father's will, business contracts. If power of attorney had existed, it would have been filed with those documents." Perhaps he kept it elsewhere. Perhaps. Or perhaps it was created after the accident and backdated to appear legitimate. The courtroom stirred. It was a serious accusation, implying fraud beyond just theft. Gideon's lawyer tried to discredit Sarah, suggesting her memory was faulty, her motivations suspect. But she held firm, her testimony measured and credible. Finally, Nora was called to testify. She walked to the stand, feeling every eye in the courtroom on her, knowing this was where Gideon's lawyer would try to destroy her credibility. He started with her background, the desperate widow, the hasty marriage, the rapid integration into Silas's life and business. "You agreed to marry Mr. Roark knowing almost nothing about him," the lawyer said. "That's quite a risk for someone in your position." "I had limited options. It was a practical decision." "And once you were married, you immediately began investigating his business affairs. Why?" "Because the numbers didn't make sense. I have experience managing household accounts. When I reviewed the ledgers, I saw discrepancies." "Or you saw an opportunity to undermine Mr. Gideon Roark's relationship with his cousin and position yourself as indispensable." "I saw theft. I investigated it. That's all." "Is it? Let's be honest, Mrs. Roark. You arrived with nothing. You married a wealthy rancher. You quickly identified the person who had the most influence over that rancher and set out to eliminate him. That's not altruism. That's ambition." Nora felt heat rise in her face but kept her voice steady. "If I were ambitious, I would have kept quiet and let Mr. Gideon continue stealing. Eventually, the ranch would have failed, Silas would have had nothing, and I would have been back where I started. I fought to save the ranch because it was the right thing to do, not because it benefited me. Yet here you are, the loyal wife standing by her husband against his greedy cousin. Quite the redemption story." "It's the truth. Your version of it, perhaps." When the testimony ended, both sides presented closing arguments. Carlson focused on the evidence, the concrete documented theft that couldn't be explained away. Gideon's lawyer focused on perception, the vulnerable man, the opportunistic wife, the family torn apart by suspicion. The judge took 2 days to render his decision. When they returned to the courthouse, Nora's hands were shaking. Silas sat beside her, his face composed but his tension visible in the way he gripped his cane. The judge cleared his throat and began reading his decision. He found that while Gideon had indeed had power of attorney, the management fees and arrangements had never been properly disclosed to Silas. That failure to disclose constituted fraud. The evidence of delivery shortfalls and padded invoices supported the claim of systematic theft. The court ordered Gideon to repay all improperly obtained funds, plus damages. The power of attorney was revoked immediately. Furthermore, the judge noted Sarah Mitchell's testimony raised serious questions about how the power of attorney had been obtained. While there wasn't sufficient evidence to pursue criminal charges at this time, the matter would be referred to the county prosecutor for further investigation. Gideon's face went white. His lawyer immediately began talking about appeals, but the damage was done. The court had ruled against him. His reputation was destroyed, and the threat of criminal investigation hung over everything. Outside the courthouse, Carlson shook Silas's hand. "It's a good ruling. Getting the money back will take time. Gideon will drag his feet, claim he doesn't have it, make us chase every dollar. But legally, you've won." "What about the criminal investigation?" Nora asked. "That's harder. We have suspicions about the accident, but proving deliberate harm 2 years after the fact will be difficult. Still, the threat of it might encourage Gideon to settle quickly and quietly rather than fight every step." That evening, back at the ranch, Silas stood on the porch looking out at his land. Nora joined him, waiting for him to process whatever he was feeling. "I should feel victorious," he said quietly. "We won. Gideon's been exposed. The ranch is safe." "But you don't feel victorious." "I feel tired and sad. He was family. I trusted him, and he betrayed that in ways I'm still trying to understand." He turned to look at her. "Does it get easier? Learning to live with that kind of betrayal?" Eventually, but it never stops hurting completely. She moved closer. The betrayal teaches you something, though. It teaches you who deserves your trust, and it makes you value the people who prove themselves worthy of it. Like you. Like me. Even when I was difficult and stubborn and overstepped. He smiled slightly. Especially then. Anyone can be pleasant when things are easy. It's the people who fight for you when it's hard who matter. They stood together in comfortable silence as the sun dropped toward the horizon. Somewhere in the barn, Ben was finishing evening chores. The cattle moved lazily in the distance. The ranch continued its rhythms, steadier now, on firmer ground. Over the following weeks, things settled into a new pattern. Gideon's lawyer negotiated a settlement. He'd repay the stolen funds over 2 years, avoiding criminal prosecution in exchange for full restitution and a signed agreement never to return to the property or contact Silas again. It wasn't everything they'd wanted, but it was enough. Silas continued his exercises, working his damaged leg with grim determination. He'd never walk without a limp or ride like he had before the accident. But he could walk the property now, inspect the ranch himself, reclaim some of what had been taken from him. And something else was healing too. The distance between him and Nora, that careful formality that had characterized their arrangement, began to shift into something warmer, something chosen rather than obligated. She noticed it in small ways. How he'd seek her opinion on business decisions without defensiveness. How he'd smile when she entered a room instead of withdrawing. How their conversations at dinner stretched longer, ranging beyond practicalities into actual connection. One evening, about 2 months after the trial, Silas knocked on her bedroom door. She opened it to find him standing in the hallway, looking uncertain. "Can we talk?" he asked. Of course. They went down to the parlor, where a fire burned against the spring chill. Silas settled into his chair with visible relief, the day's exertions catching up with him. "I've been thinking about our arrangement," he said. Nora's stomach tightened. "All right." When we married, it was purely practical. Neither of us wanted anything beyond security and stability. You needed a home. I needed household help. We agreed to keep things separate, formal, businesslike. I remember. But that's not what we have anymore, is it? Nora met his eyes. No, it's not. What do we have, Nora? Because I need to know if I'm the only one who started feeling like this marriage might be more than just an arrangement. Her breath caught. You're not the only one. Relief crossed his face. I'm not good at this. At relationships or emotions or any of it. I've spent 2 years angry at the world, and before that I was so focused on building this ranch that I never made room for anything else. I don't know how to be a good husband. Neither of us knows how to do this. But maybe we can figure it out together. She moved to sit beside him. I didn't expect to care about you, Silas. I came here desperate and defensive. But you've become someone I trust, someone I want to fight for. Not just because of the ranch, but because of you. He reached for her hand, his touch warm and solid. I was broken when you arrived. Not just physically, but in every way that matters. And you didn't try to fix me or pity me. You just demanded I be better, refused to let me drown in bitterness and pride. That's a gift I'll never be able to repay. You don't need to repay it. You just need to keep being honest with me, keep trusting me, keep trying even when it's hard. I can do that. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. Their kiss was tentative at first, careful, testing this new territory. Then deeper, more certain, a promise being made without words. When they pulled apart, Silas was smiling, really smiling, not the bitter half-expression she'd seen before, but something genuine and warm. So what happens now? He asked. Now we figure out how to build a real marriage, not the practical arrangement we started with, but something chosen, something worth fighting for. I like the sound of that. The seasons turned. Summer brought work and heat and the steady rhythm of ranch life. Silas rode again, not gracefully but competently, his adapted saddle and determined practice letting him reclaim that part of himself. Nora managed the household accounts and discovered she had a head for business that extended beyond just spotting theft. Together they made decisions about the ranch's future, planning improvements and expansions now that they weren't hemorrhaging money to Gideon's schemes. The legal settlement came through in installments. It would take the full 2 years to recover everything, but the ranch was stable now. More than stable, thriving. With proper management and honest accounting, the operation that had been dying under Gideon's theft began to flourish. Ben became more than just a foreman, a trusted friend who'd stood with them when it mattered. He brought his wife to dinner sometimes, and the four of them would sit around the table trading stories and building community in a house that had been isolated for too long. And slowly, carefully, Nora and Silas built something neither of them had expected to find. Not a fairy tale. They still argued, still frustrated each other, still carried their individual damage and pride. But they'd learned to fight fair, to apologize when they were wrong, to choose each other even when it was difficult. One evening in late summer, almost a year after Gideon's exposure, Nora found Silas in the yard behind the house. He'd set up an old horseshoe pit, something his father had built decades ago, and that had been neglected since the accident. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Remembering something I used to be good at." He tested his weight on his damaged leg, positioned himself carefully, and threw. The horseshoe sailed through the air and landed around the post with a satisfying ring. "Perfect throw," Nora said. "First time I've managed that since before the accident." He turned to look at her, and his expression was lighter than she'd ever seen it. "I've been thinking about what we've built here. This ranch, this marriage, this life. It's not what I imagined when I was young and healthy and sure I could handle anything. Is that good or bad? It's better. Because what I had before was control and pride and isolation. What I have now is partnership. Someone who sees me at my worst and chooses to stay anyway." He moved toward her, his gait still uneven but stronger than it had been. "I was angry when you showed up. Angry that I needed help, that my pride had been wounded enough to accept a marriage of convenience. I fought you every step of the way. I noticed, but you fought back. You refused to let me destroy myself out of stubbornness. You saved this ranch, and you saved me, and I never properly thanked you for that. You're thanking me now." He pulled her close, his arms solid and sure. "I love you, Nora. I don't think I knew that's what this was until recently, but it's the truth. You're not just my wife in name. You're my partner, my equal, my choice." She felt tears prick her eyes. "I love you too, even when you were terrible and proud and impossible. Especially then? Especially then." They stood together in the fading light, two people who'd started as strangers bound by necessity and had become something unbreakable through choice. The ranch spread out around them, the land Silas's father had built, that Gideon had tried to steal, that they'd fought to save together. It wasn't a perfect ending. Silas's leg would always hurt, the scars of betrayal would always ache. They'd still argue and frustrate each other and carry their individual damage. But they'd learned that love wasn't about perfection. It was about choosing to fight for each other even when it was hard. Especially when it was hard. The horseshoe gleamed in the dust where it had landed, a perfect ringer after years of absence. A small victory, but victories didn't need to be dramatic to matter. Sometimes they were just about reclaiming something you thought was lost forever. Nora leaned into Silas's embrace, feeling the steady beat of his heart, the warmth of his arms, the solid reality of a man who'd been broken and had chosen to heal, who'd been betrayed and had chosen to trust again, who'd been alone and had chosen partnership. The sun set over the ranch, painting the sky in shades of gold and amber. Somewhere in the barn, horses shifted in their stalls. The cattle settled for the night. The land breathed with the rhythm of life continuing, of work to be done tomorrow, of a future being built one careful decision at a time. They'd survived the worst and come out stronger. Not unscathed. Strength wasn't about avoiding damage, but about refusing to let that damage define you. About finding someone who saw your scars and loved you anyway. About building something real from the broken pieces of what came before. Nora had come to this ranch desperate, with nothing but a trunk of belongings and no options left. She'd found security, yes, but she'd also found purpose. Partnership. Love that was earned rather than assumed, chosen rather than obligated. Silas had been broken and isolated, his pride destroying him from the inside while family betrayed him from without. He'd found healing, not the kind that erased damage, but the kind that integrated it, made space for limitation while refusing to accept defeat. Together, they'd built something neither could have managed alone. A marriage that was real. A ranch that was thriving. A future that was theirs to shape. As darkness settled over the land, they walked back to the house hand in hand. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Work to be done, decisions to be made, the endless rhythm of ranch life. But they'd face it together, as partners, as equals. as two people who'd learned that the strongest bonds were forged not in perfect circumstances, but in choosing each other through the hard times. The house waited, warm and welcoming. Their house now. Not just his or hers, but theirs. A home built not on desperation or convenience, but on trust earned, respect given, and love chosen deliberately, every single day. And that, Nora thought as Silas held the door open for her, was worth fighting for. Worth the risk, the struggle, the stubborn refusal to give up even when everything seemed lost. Because some things were worth fighting for. And some people were worth believing in, even when they couldn't quite believe in themselves. They'd proven that to each other. And they'd keep proving it for as long as they had.